Welcome everyone to our first guest lecture presentation for our RAMP project. I know you're all very excited, I know I am, to hear Charlie Massy speak with us today. Before we do make a formal start, I am honoured as always to be inviting Rachel Linwood to do our Welcome to Country. And as you may or may not know, Rachel works at Guinevere College of Indigenous Australian Peoples here at Southern Cross University. Rachel has a huge number of leadership roles, from course coordinator, chair of Guinevere College faculty board, to co-chair of the Elders Council. Rachel is also a Bundjalung woman of this region and has worked with local community in various contexts over many years. And it's always a pleasure to welcome Rachel to do this for us, because she always has a wonderful way of just connecting with everyone and connecting us together as we go forward in our time together today. So thank you so much, Rachel.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Simone, and thanks for inviting me here to do an acknowledgement of country for this event that I'm sure will be the most enriching and most productive event. So as a formal acknowledgement, as a Bundjalung woman, I acknowledge that we are meeting today on Widjabul country, and Widjabul peoples being of the wider Bundjalung nation, whose country we're meeting, some of us live on and some of us work on. So always wonderful to be here. And I particularly love events like this because it's always about community, and as Simone touched on so very well, it's about building those relationships in community in the work that we do, whatever that work happens to be. And I note that your guest speaker today, Charles Massy, is going to be talking on from his perspective and talking about what is essentially his relationship to the land and to the landscape. And that's very much in line with Indigenous ways of approaching things and doing things. So it's great to be here. And just to further confirm the importance that events like this are an opportunity for all peoples to work together to build those relationships that will best support the purpose of the work that you're doing, and that will benefit everyone that's involved, and that will benefit the land and the environment on which we live and which we work. So as a Bundjalung woman, once again, I wish you all the very best for the event today, and I'm sure it'll be very enjoyable and very fruitful. And that we always say that, yes, we have the relationship to land and to country and so forth, but what makes that even stronger is our relationships with each other as people, as Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, and that's really fundamental in any work that we do in this regard. So all the best for today's event, everyone. And Simone, thank you for inviting me along to do a acknowledgement of country to open this event for today.
Thank you very much, Rachel, much appreciated. And I would like now to also invite our director, the founder of the Regen Ag Alliance, based out of Southern Cross University, Lorraine Gordon, and she's just going to say a couple of words for us today as well. Thanks, Lorraine.
Thanks, Simone. Very big welcome to everyone today. There's some very interesting conditions going on around our country at the moment. I myself am talking to you from Gambanya, nation country, and I can tell you we are very, very wet here right now. So I'm sure everybody's got certain weather challenges that they're dealing with. So thank you so much for partaking in today's events. Look, Regen Ag is a very, very personal journey. And my own journey has been a journey of some 37 years in this space, coming from a conventional background to where I've landed now, but I'm not there yet. And I'm not sure you ever do get there. And that's the exciting thing about the space in which you've decided to sign up to today, is that it is a journey that you're forever striving to be at one with your landscape and to really get an understanding of what that means. And therefore you never get bored. Not one day is ever the same, and you never stop learning. And that's a really critical part of regenerative agriculture and the journey that you're about to embark on if you haven't already. And it also means different things to different people. You know, we're forever hearing that, you know, what's a definition of regenerative agriculture? And it does change. I know that we get our students to come up with their own definition when they start their various courses at Southern Cross University, and then we ask them to revisit that definition, their own definition, when they've finished their learnings, and it does change. So it's not a stagnant thing. It keeps moving as your level of understanding of regenerative agriculture and your level of understanding of landscape function develops, I guess. And so my suggestion to you all is just to adopt one practice at a time, practice by practice, because if you try and implement everything on your farm at once, it's like a detox for your farm, and that can be, it can really put your farm into a shock. And we've got enough shocks coming at us. So I just say take a step at a time, and when you've decided that that's been a really good practice to adopt, you know, try another one and then another one. Don't try and do everything at once. You'll end up going a bit crazy, and you'll find that your farm won't necessarily react well to start with. But there's no better way to kick off today's proceedings than with the king of regenerative agriculture himself, Charles Massy, who we're absolutely delighted to have as part of our program. He's been a big supporter of all of our educational products that we have on offer now at Southern Cross Uni in this space, and I think we're very lucky to have him. So Charlie, on behalf of myself and my team at SCU and these lovely people that I'm looking at in little boxes on the screen, thank you so much for sharing some of your very valuable time with us today. So I think I'll leave it at that, Simone, and let this lovely fellow kick off the many lessons he has to share with us.
Absolutely. Over to you, Charlie. Thank you. Thanks, Graham.
Okay, thanks very much, Lorraine and Simone, and for the excellent courses you're running there. And thanks to everyone who's coming online, and particular thanks to Rachel, because really what I'm talking about today is country and how we can improve it to levels of health and its impact, therefore, on planetary and human health as well. So I'll start with big picture and then move on to more specifics about farming and then implications for planetary and human health. So I'll open up a different definition of regen ag, but what we're really talking about are complex adaptive systems. Any farmscape is constantly evolving depending on what we're doing to it and what the weather's doing to it and the animals are doing to it. And I would argue that we actually don't manage farms, but landscapes which comprise these nested complex adaptive systems. And why I'm talking about that is that I finished undergraduate uni in the mid-70s and then didn't go back to uni until in my mid-late 50s. And that period had seen the whole rise of the computer digital era. And out of that came this understanding of complex adaptive systems, which are obviously hugely complex You know, it doesn't matter if it's your landscape, human brain, planet Earth, World Wide Web, it's millions of things constantly interacting and adapting. And that's what's happening in the landscapes we manage. And, you know, some days I'm scared to go out the back door for fear that I'm going to do something wrong with my stock management and change all that. And so this eminent biologist said that we need to remember that the history of the biosphere is a history of co-evolution between organisms and their environment, and across these huge scales and multiple scales of space, time, and complexity. So we're not just managing something simple. And that some days, as I said, I'm scared to go out the back door with the risk of causing some damage. And classic of this is our soil. It's not just a simple substrate of material and chemicals. It's unbelievably complex, everything always interacting between each other. And if we get time, I'll touch on that idea of quorum sensing later. And the other factor is that our landscapes are social ecological systems where humans are interfering. And we're trying to manage these systems that have evolved over tens of millions of years. So this is not just simple to manage. It doesn't just require simple top-down management. You've got to think quite holistically to do that. And just look at the complexity and the systems we're managing, whether it's soil, microbial, the microbe and the plant, maximizing plants to capture our photosynthetic energy, biodiversity, so on and so on. And all across those, you know, like I say, some days I'm scared to go out the back door. And you look at these critters. As I said, I had to get my head around the understanding of complex adaptive systems. And I remember having to teach masters and third year students and had to get my head around. There's about 12 traits of these complex adaptive systems, and I'm not going to go through them. But one of them is this idea that everything evolves with each other in our landscapes, insects and plants and soil biology, et cetera, and trees, et cetera. And this is just a classic case in point that the pollination and germination, both our food crops, but native plant species, whether it's with bees, parasitic wasps, native insects, it's incredibly complex. And it's taken millions of years to get to that nature of fine tuning. And just on that thought, all the species in our environment evolved by self-organizing with elements in the system. And if we start doing the right thing with our landscapes, we start to get surprises that new features, new traits emerge, and these are called emergent properties. They're resident in the system. They've probably been suppressed through our industrial farming. But if we really do the right thing, they'll pop up. And I'm talking about the emergence of native C4 grasses that no one's seen for many decades, and the arrival of parasitic wasps and insects. They're only waiting to be given a chance if we stimulate health. And of course, some species in these systems are more important than others, like apex predators. And a few species have disproportionate effects, and they're known as keystone species. And you've probably heard examples, but the Yellowstone National Park, when the wolves were shot out, the system sort of collapsed and simplified. And a few years ago, when they brought them back, it started to regenerate back to health. If you think about the cassowary there in the middle, in our northern tropical rainforests, something like 70% of plant species won't germinate unless their seeds have gone through the gut of a cassowary, which prepares them for it. And things like flying foxes are critical in pollination in systems as well. This is the classic case, the sea otter, the Pacific sea otter on the west coast of the USA, one of the densest furs in the world. They were nearly hunted to extinction for, of all things, fashion and amongst the rich in Europe. When they were nearly made extinct, sea urchins exploded because it's the favourite food of the otters. And with the overpopulation of urchins, they started to kill off the massive kelp beds, and the fisheries declined, and the fishermen jumped up and down, and so on and so on. So eventually they banned the hunting, and in no time the sea urchins were controlled, and the system regenerated. The kelp beds got better, mussels and the fisheries returned, but also other unexpected consequences. Because of the health of the ecosystem, the endangered bald eagles increased in numbers again, and there was less coastal erosion because kelp was stabilising the waves, and so on and so on. So it just illustrates this co-evolved complexity and resilience if we do the right thing by an ecosystem. And of course, that species is a mega keystone species. I'll be talking about what we're doing to the planet, let alone our landscapes. And we're sort of the keystone species of all keystones. Another attribute of complex adaptive systems is their capacity to self-organise. And so there's, depending on whether we manage well or badly, we have an instant impact on how that landscape functions. And if we do a good job, it's going to reorganise back to health using those properties that have long been co-evolved in the system. And you suddenly see the emergence of these, say, new grasses, new patterns and traits, new survival strategies, etc. And that process is called self-organisation, that our landscapes have this capacity to self-organise. And that's part of the definition I'm getting at. Good regenerative management allows this healthy self-organisation using those hidden properties that we haven't seen for a while, the emergent properties. And obviously, this is an obvious one, I think. Diversity, it's another trait of these systems at all levels, below the species level, species and bigger factors. And it's a pretty basic rule of thumb. The greater the diversity within a system, the more resilient it's going to be. You simplify a system, you're far more vulnerable to all sorts of shocks and diseases and all that sort of thing. So, to sum that up, I'm arguing we don't manage farms per se, but landscapes, and these comprise a whole lot of complex adaptive systems. And so that leads, you're talking about different definitions of regen ag. Well, I would throw this one in. The definition of regeneration is farmers enabling self-organisation in landscapes. In other words, we're enabling these ancient, co-evolved emergent properties to reappear and function. A problem with the whole system is we've now got this sort of meant to be top predator, top wisdom type animal that calls itself doubly wise, Homo sapiens sapiens. And yet here we find ourselves destroying our very future with what we've done to the planet, let alone our human health. And again, what we're doing is ignoring our own long co-evolved environmental history. And I'll touch on that later in regard to nutrients and landscapes and stuff. So the big issue really is our planet there on the left. As far as we know, it's the only blue-green planet with life anywhere in the entire universe. There's been no blue-green denoting life planets discovered anywhere else, and it evolved here with us on this planet. And I don't want you to get hung up here, but our Earth's about 4.6 billion years ago. First life appeared less than 1 billion years ago. But it took a long while for first life on land to emerge, about 460 million years ago. So virtually 90% of Earth's journey before land life appeared. First fungi about 300 million years ago. And I guess the ones I just want to touch on, flowering plants about 123 million years ago. And then our first grasslands didn't appear until about 25 million years ago, the sort of less complex grasslands, the C3s. And then the C4 grasslands, like our kangaroo grasses and other more advanced grasses, only about 15 million years ago. And the first sort of hominids, our genus, some sort of primitive ape, about 4 million years ago. and then we humans only 250,000 years ago. So if you think about our impact on Earth and how long we've been here, if you telescope those 4.6 billion years into just 1 year, for argument's sake, we humans have been around 1.1 second. And look what we've done. We're a very powerful species. And I'll illustrate that by what we've done to our planet. It was life that developed the chemistry and the layers in the atmosphere to protect life itself, because it's the harshest environment you can imagine without that protective skin around the Earth. And our planet, to sustain life, has 9 systems, basically, that the planetary scientists have now defined, that sustains this precious stuff underneath. And these are some of them: climate change, ozone depletion, which we've just saved from being catastrophic. Climate change, we know, is going completely off the charts. The more carbon dioxide we put up causing climate change, the more it's absorbed by the ocean, which is turning it acidic, which could threaten the whole series of life chains in the ocean. We know we've destabilised the key biogeochemical flows of nitrogen, phosphorus, with drastic use of fresh water, drastic changes to land. And we now know, up till now, in the history of Earth, there's been 5 major disasters that have destroyed biodiversity. The last one being about 62 million years ago, when a huge asteroid hit Earth, and about 95% of species were instantly wiped out and made extinct. We humans have now triggered, in all that time, the 6th greatest extinction event, given the number of species that are disappearing by the day. So, I reiterate, we're a powerful species. So that's why they're calling it the Anthropocene. We've moved out of the 12,000-year Holocene, when agriculture and modern civilization evolved, and we're now destabilising those systems caused by we humans. So how do we get into the mess? Our Western agriculture evolved in that Fertile Crescent, Middle Eastern area from about 12,000 years ago. The domestic cereal plants and animals, well, the animals were first domesticated around about 9,000–10,000 years ago, sheep and goats, and then later cattle. The first plants were domesticated soon after. Little weedy annuals that we call cereals today were part of a diverse grazing land. And we know that all our cereals are adapted to grazing. And the first plough, having been a young mountaineer when I was at uni, that was on a trip into the Himalayas, and I took this photo of this Himalayan farmer. You can see the country he farms. That plough he's got on his shoulder is a replica of the first plough going back about 7,000 or 8,000 years ago. As I said, our Western agriculture evolved in that eastern end of the Mediterranean, what they call the Fertile Crescent. You can see that green zone there around that eastern end: Turkey, Iran, Iraq, all those countries around the top of Africa and the Sahel. It was incredibly rich. Most of the Mediterranean was forested. The grasslands were extraordinarily rich and diverse. But already by after a couple of thousand years, or a bit less, Plato's whinging about the total deforestation around the Mediterranean. He's saying the eroded hills of Attica around Athens look like the skeleton of a sick man. All the soil's gone, basically. That's the Fertile Crescent today. Overgrazing, overclearing, constant drought, constant social conflict. And most modern agriculture is on that track around the world. Hence the climate crisis and what we're doing to the planet. Famous statement by President Roosevelt when after the end of the American Dust Bowl, when they had to draw up the soil conservation law, a nation that destroys its soils destroys itself. And we now know that globally agriculture is degraded upwards of or over 37% of all land suitable for agriculture. All right, we're going to get onto the positives. I'm just getting the background story said here. And we're no different to America. We just don't talk about our dust bowls as much. You can see that picture there from the 30s, Mallee, Wimmera drought event that was right through South Australia and Western New South Wales as well. You can see how much topsoil is lost. A leading agrarian thinker in the States, Wes Jackson, makes this profound statement that the ploughshare may well have destroyed more options for future generations than the sword. I think he's right. We're still doing it. The minute we bare the soil and release carbon and compact the soil and kill off the biology, we are on the pathway to creating deserts. The first step to desertification and dead soils. And as you can see in the middle picture, the last few droughts, massive dust storms flowing west to east, crossing Tasman Sea onto New Zealand. I remember as a young mountain climber in New Zealand walking on red ice, and I was told rather aggressively by a Kiwi, was our bloody droughts of the 1930s. Millions of tonnes this time as well. And the other aspect we don't hear a lot about is who are the winners in this drive to full-on industrial agriculture. This was sent to me by a top analyst in Canada. The blue is the amount of, if you like, the income for the big end of town, the Monsantos and the Deeres and the Shells and the banks and all the rest of it. The green is the net farm income. From that period, from the 30s right through. But the recent analysis shows as modern industrial agriculture took off in the 32 years, 1985 to 2016, agribusiness captured 98% of the farmer's revenue. So who is having who on? The other thing to remember, it was out of the killing fields of the World War and its giant stockpiles of chemicals and other material and ammunition and explosives, etc., that the big multinationals said, wow, I know what we can do with this stuff, and they've turned it into the modern herbicides, pesticides, and chemical fertilizers. That was the beginning of industrial ag. A capture by the big end of town. So just to reiterate all that, that's where it's landed us. But the exciting story that I think you guys have got your ears pricked to and you're applying yourselves, and what I've been talking about is that Regen Ag has some of the best, if not the best solutions to this dilemma. Yes, we're in the Anthropocene. These events are just far too frequent now. Don't have to talk about that. I'm sure some of you guys are looking at some of this, and I think rain's coming in around a lot of the state again. Why this, what's called the Great Acceleration that put us into the Anthropocene? It's what happened post Second World War, which I just mentioned before. If you look at the socio-economic trends, they're nearly all exponential graphs. Doesn't matter if it's human population and real GDP, direct foreign investment, primary energy use, the way we use water, telecommunications, it's all showing an exponential pathway post 1950 with the rise of the modern economies. And same with the Earth system trends, all the atmospheric gases, surface temperature, what we're doing to life in the ocean acidification, clearing of lands and forests, all showing the same trajectory. And the key driver behind it, it's the great story we tell ourselves as a modern civilization, this crazy idea of economic rationalism, growth for the sake of growth. as one biologist said, the philosophy of growth is the philosophy of a cancer cell. And this guy I've spent a bit of time with, a wonderful thinker, Paul Hawken. He says, we're stealing the future, selling it in the present, and calling it GDP. In other words, we're overloading our systems. But the good news comes, there is another pathway. And we now know that regenerative agriculture is a key solution, and in many areas, the best solution to addressing the Anthropocene and turning things around. So it's a simple equation, really. We develop healthy landscapes and soils, you get healthy food fibre and healthy profits, people, and a healthy planet. So I'll unpack that and what's behind a healthy landscape and what we can do about it. Well, as I found to my cost, having started off as an industrial farmer who built a landscape, I didn't have any ecological literacy. It's like learning to read at school. It's the first step. So I had to take over a farm when I was 22 in the early 70s. I copied the best farmers in the district, walked into the 5-year drought of the late 70s, early 80s. Thought my major asset was our sheep. And so we kept them and bought in feed and built the debt. And it was because I had no ecological literacy. I did huge harm to our landscape, and it's something I'm still ashamed of. And it took me a while to realise there's another way to farm. And that's because the best things in life are free, such as sunlight. And so in having to teach students at uni and stuff, I adapted Alan Savory's model of the basics of ecological literacy into a 5-part model. Obviously beginning with solar function. Everything comes from that, and plants then capturing that energy, putting sugars in the soil. That hugely impacts a healthy water cycle. And then number 3 there, a healthy soil mineral cycle. And you get all that cooking, your biodiversity or dynamic ecosystem communities follows. And I've added to the model that weird species on the right, number 5. I guess the point I want to make is the interconnection between all those 5 of those arrows. They're all interconnected. And it's actually these that undergird ecosystems and human civilization. Think about our modern civilization and its basis on fossil fuel, which has come from nature. But what happens when we do that? Release that carbon back up into the air, et cetera, and pulverize and compact the ground and kill off the biology. All those interconnections, well, most of them are completely destroyed, and you've destroyed proper healthy function. So I'll walk you through the basics. Some of it's probably 101 basics for a lot of you, but it illustrates, if you have a weak link in your farm, it illustrates where you start out of those 5 functions. So obviously green plants, a picture of the plant there, I regard my role as a manager, and I'm a livestock manager here, we don't crop, as to stack on as many solar panels, the green chloroplasts, as I can, for as long as I can throughout the year, to punch sugars in the soil. Fairly simple. And that's because that function impacts all the others, and keeping the ground covered, et cetera, et cetera. So you would have all covered, I'm sure, in this course, holistic grazing, which Alan Savory, when he was a young biologist in the 60s, and then Rhodesia twigged to, he asked himself the question, how come the healthiest grasslands on earth have got millions of animals grazing and dunging and carrying on in them? And same applied to the buffalo and the prairies, bottom right. And he eventually worked out that there was huge animal density in dung and urine, but the animals weren't there for more than a few days because the big cat predators were driving them. And then they wouldn't come back on migration for many months, if not 6 months. So there were the sort of three guiding principles. Animal impact, dung and urine with it. Short grazings of only a few days, and then long rest periods. And out of that evolved the whole system of holistic grazing. And top right, you can see just the energy in a mob of wildebeest, for example. This is a classic case. I visited Norman Croon in Africa when I was doing some research and stayed with him out in a tough country like our Western Division. And he bought this land in the 70s, one of Xavier's first clients. That's his country on the left of that fence. But when he first arrived, it was all like that paddock on the right, the current neighbour. And Norman said he had to walk 1 kilometre to find a perennial plant. The response to return of diversity and soil function and water retention was just enormous. He tripled and quadrupled his carrying capacity. And when I visited him, he was buying a new farm every 6 years or so because it was so profitable. It works in every continent. This is up in the top of the Pilbara, some of Australia's tough country over in the west. This family who bought this property called Sheila Plains on the right, when they bought it, it had been basically set, stocked and trashed since the 1880s. If you look at that country, probably less than 10%, not probably, definitely less than 10% ground cover. And after only 11 years of switching their grazing management, they built up well into the 90% ground cover, and they're now running 3 to 4 times more stock, and that's cattle. Now we're talking about quite a few thousand. Another example of well-executed holistic grazing in northwest Queensland. That red arrow is the same tree in those two photos. Photo at the top, that land had been flogged for about 100 years, too regularly burned out, set stocked. But then with new management, they switched to regenerative grazing, and after only 10 years, the transformation's been extraordinary of landscape regenerating and again, increased productivity. You don't always get increased productivity, you certainly get greater resilience, et cetera, and diversity and health. Unwittingly, this research was done in '61 before savoury was around, and they grew plants in a laboratory, 4 different regimes, only for a few weeks, for 4 months, 16 weeks. And really unwittingly, they tripped over that the ideal management, if you're not going to leave it totally ungrazed, is the second one from the left, which was only clipped very occasionally compared to regular clipping of the 2 on the right. So it effectively demonstrates good regen grazing, greater root depth and thicker swards, and a lot more production in the end. And look, I've heard historians and academics say that the worst thing for the Australian environment is the cloven hoof. Or sticking with the organic metaphor, I think it's a load of bullshit. If they're well managed, their feet aren't destroyers. They will help break open cap soils, and the great massagers, the great fertilizer machines, re-inoculating country with microbiology, etc. after a drought, and great inoculators thereby. And of course, they're great mowers when they're well managed. A really powerful tool, sheep, ruminant animals in a regenerative grazing system. But of course, if you're going to run this program well, you've got to be observant. Regenerative agriculture grazing really requires constant observation, and it's probably lacking in this photo we see in Africa. And the same thing applies to our cropping, because as I mentioned before, our modern cereals were actually part of the original pastures that co-evolved for millions of years with cattle. They're adapted to ruminant grazing them. There's a number of grass species that are actually stimulated by animal saliva dropping on them. So our modern crops are designed to be grazed at the right times for stimulatory effect. And if you look at that photo on the right, in this multi-species cropping regime, if you graze it well at the right time, you can take a crop off later in the spring, as you can see there, and then you're left with summer feed and ground cover. If we then think about the water cycle, this is a guy I met, not my photo, but I met him at a conference. He's in northern Mexico. If you look at the blue arrow in those two photos, it's the same point in that landscape. And the paddock, the photo on the left, that country had been set stocked for probably 200-300 years. And then they swung over to holistic grazing. And after only 27 years, the transformation is quite remarkable. On the left, compacted, overgrazed country, the water runs down the bottom. On the right, it all goes in ground, probably 10,000 times more water in ground. This is an example here on the Monero, the last drought. That's our country on the right, actually. That photo, if you look at the left, we kept our ground cover by selling down and then having to adjust most of the stock. The guy on the left kept all his stock, didn't like grass, obviously. And then a month after I took the photo on the left, the drought broke in 24 hours. We had 4 inches, 100 mil. I went for a drive at 10 mils, and you can see that flogged out country couldn't hold any more water after 10 mils. And when I walked across the road onto the country on the right, there's no water visible. I then came back 24 hours later. The country on the left was still pouring mud and water. The dams were full of mud and crap. Country on the right, still no visible water. So the lesson there is, if you manage your land right and you get your soils deep and absorbent and healthy, ground cover, the place on the left lost 85, 90% of that rain event, which was a drought breaker. The place on the right captured all of it. Now, I won't go into this too much, but what we've actually lost with our clearing and overgrazing is the critical small water function, which with our diverse pastures and active root fungus working underneath and small marsupials spreading the fungus, the ground was soft and absorbent. There's a huge interaction, particularly at night, between the above ground air and the soil atmosphere. For example, at night, in a healthy landscape like this, you'd have a foot of air at about 99% relative humidity. And due to atmospheric pressure change overnight and temperature change every night for about half the year, that type of a landscape, say healthy grassy woodland or grassland, was absorbing about 3 mils, which added up to 12 to 18 inches extra rain a year. And I won't go into the details here, but and it was the small marsupials that spread that fungus, and we've lost them, of course. But if you go set stocking, point 3 at the bottom, overgrazing and or tilling the wrong way, and we've lost our small marsupials, well, then we've destroyed the small water. We can reclaim much of it. These are the guys we lost. Once you see a long pointy nose on marsupial, you know they love fungus. So what's overgrazing, overclearing, more burning, overburning, etc., and radical industrial cropping going to do to the small water cycle? Well, it destroys it. And there's good reasons for that. If you look at the photo on the right first, it's that area in Western Australia where I think it was a 12-inch rainfall ISO height. They said, look, we can clear to the left, which was to the west. All that mallee country was okay to clear for cropping, government sanctioned. Country on the right was too dry. But today we see a reversal. You can see by the clouds hanging over that vegetation. The rainfall now for a few kilometres to the left in what was once high rainfall, but now cropland, it's lower rainfall than you'll find when you go into the native vegetation on the right. And so what's behind this is that if we want a healthy small water cycle, we need rain-making bacteria which come from plants. It's the plant microbes that act as nuclei around which the water droplets and the ice crystals can form, the guys that make clouds. And cloud-making bacteria contains proteins that allow this ice formation. And just one bacteria can be the source of 1,000 ice crystals once you put it up in the atmosphere. And so cloud water can contain 28,000 different species of bacteria. So again, diversity, keeping the ground covered, it's so crucial. And of course, old-fashioned tillage. You know, I've probed the soil different places in Australia. And you can see 2 or 3 different compaction layers, depending on the type of grazing and certainly the tillage forms, as you'd see on the left. If you get to a well-managed no-till field, a healthy grassland, you've got huge penetration of roots, storage of water, allowing different minerals to be accessed, less compacted soil. There's just so many advantages to trying to work with nature and treat her like she likes to work, rather than dominating and simplifying. 2011, I was cutting across the head of the Liverpool Plains. Some of you would know, some of Australia's best volcanic black soils. And it was a dry year. And the previous evening, they'd had about 8 mils of rain, and I came through 12 hours later. And here's water sitting on some of Australia's best soils. So I hopped over, there's a fence just past the railway line there, and I went for a walk. And those soils were so dead, so capped, so unabsorbent that rain that should have disappeared in minutes was still sitting there 12 hours later. They'd been so overworked, so poisoned, etc., and lost all their carbon, etc. So my key message, yeah, we can't go back, but with regenerative grazing and cropping, we can help restore the small water cycle and get those landscape functions working. And with that comes better profitability and better human and animal health. And of course, function number 3, the soil mineral cycle and the soil food web, it's the biggie. And the key, of course, which I was completely blind to as a young gung-ho farmer, is a biologically active living soil, an effective soil mineral cycle. It's the key. And it's because soil microbes and other soil life require plants for food. They need the sugars from photosynthesis. And about 93% of non-plant organisms are microbes. So you can't see the little buggers. And so no wonder I was blind to it. And it's really from those diversity of plants, that rich sugary exudates and decaying plant matter that feeds the soil microbes and fungi. And in the process, they fix carbon, addressing climate and other issues for the planet. So you could sum it up and say that soil is actually a community. It's not a bloody commodity. This is just one classic example. On the right, you've got a depiction of a plant in a healthy soil. Now that fuzzy stuff is the hyphae, the feeding tubes of the root fungus. You can't see them except under a microscope generally. And if you think about a healthy cubic metre of soil, well, I'll go back. The plants, a healthy plant and a healthy soil has a bargain with the plants. The plants give them the root sugars, which is their food, and their part of the bargain is to go off and access nutrients for the plant, minerals and other things. And in a healthy cubic metre of soil with lots of fungi, of these micro feeding tubes, there can be 25,000 kilometres, which is hard to conceive. If you go to the picture on the left of a heavy industrial soil where the plant's only getting its daily drug dose of NPK, etc., there's virtually no fungi. So they're totally reliant on a simple diet. And And that says one hell of a lot about human and animal health, production, resilience, etc. Privileged to get to know these people. Diane and Haggerty in Western Australia, they started off with 600 acres with a debt. They're now farming upwards of 50,000 profitably. They've eliminated all industrial chemicals. So when and Ian has some of the biggest machines you can imagine, modern machines, he's just adapted them. So when they are sowing cereals and canola, they've got one tube on the tines that injects worm juice, which is the biology, and another tube injects compost extract, which is the food for the biology. And by replicating nature like that, they've now got an extraordinary, profitable, resilient system on soils that most of you people listening to are equivalent to beach sand. They're that ancient. And so these two photos at the top are taken only 40 metres apart across the fence. On the left's an industrial farming neighbour, so that's about November usually when they harvest. And then you've got pretty much bare ground for the rest of the summer. And nowadays, if they see a bit of green, they go and spray the thing because it's a dreaded weed. But if you then go under the soil, 40 centimetres or so at the most, you can see a lot of plant roots, but hardly any biology. Then go across 40 metres, same water container, go under the ground, you can't see any roots because of the chemical chains, etc., of the biology has made, high carbon chains, things like lamellan that surround those the roots of those plants. And above ground, instead of going into a hot, dry summer with no cover, they've now got C4 grasses that are now come through under this system, which are just emerging through the winter months, but now they've got summer feed and many species now that agronomists haven't seen for about 80 years. High profitability. And a friend of mine, Walter Yaner, ex-CSIRO soil scientist, he's got this wonderful statement that our soils should be like cathedrals. The cathedral stones are the mineral particles, the cements, the soil organic matter. And just like a cathedral, a healthy soil should be at least 50% air pockets, because a hell of a lot goes on there. That's where water's stored, where nutrients exchanged. You can see the cations, pluses there, where protection from disease and harmful elements occurs. And really, it sums it up that healthy soil has intelligent selective interfaces. And that's why the Haggertys call their system natural intelligence farming or agriculture. But if we carry on like that on the right, like I've done, it's no different to the actual cathedrals in the Second World War, bombing them, just like our soil cathedrals. You bomb them into dysfunctionality. And what's now emerging, which is again mimicking nature in the way she co-evolved, grasses and animals over long periods, is multi-species pasture and cover cropping. Sowing across the 5 plant genera, anywhere from 14 to 25 or more different species, and just kick-starting, almost like on drugs, the activation of that soil biology, because you're trying to replicate nature there. And as I pointed out before, if you graze at the right time, you can still harvest. And this is a really exciting development that is now gathering speed in Australia and internationally. And this is one of the pioneers of it, along with Colin Sykes here in Australia, Gabe Brown. So he likes to use at least 13, if not more than 20 diverse species, lays the cover down on his soils with a high density cattle grazing, and then drills into it coming into the winter. And so if you look at that shovel on the right, Christine Jones took that photo. Underneath on the shovel is Gabe's soil. You can see the beautiful aggregation and worms and organic matter. On the top is a neighbour 40 metres across the fence, who is where who is where Gabe was about 12 years ago before he changed. That's the contrast. And Gabe took a test a couple of years ago. When they get a big rain event in the spring, his first inch takes 9 seconds to disappear into those aggregated porous soils. Second inch takes 16 seconds. That hard clod under Gabe's previous industrial management, the first inch takes about 2 hours to get in. And my guess is if I took a penetrometer, Gabe's soils would be about 200 PSI. I'd reckon that clod on top's getting up to 1,000 if you didn't break the penetrometer. So what's going on really when you get it right? And I'm not going to get into this too much. It's a recent connection between microbiologists and soil scientists. We realize if you do all those things that I've just illustrated to get really healthy soil biology cooking, you get to this stage where the microbes and the plants start talking to each other. So you get a minimum critical threshold, the quorum, and the sensing is them talking. And for example, if a plant's running out of nitrogen, it'll start to send out language in the form of chemistry, hormone or what says, look, I'm low on nitrogen. And the rhizobia bacteria pick up the message and they migrate across and attach themselves to the plant roots and fix the nitrogen. It's that sort of collaboration once you get to a really healthy critical threshold. It's that communication between plants and microbes. And this is one of the leaders of it, Professor David Johnson, West Coast of the USA. And he's found that this communication language, their signal proteins, is 10 times higher in healthy soils than stressed ones. And he says when the microbes and the plants get it, it triggers housekeeping, what he calls housekeeping gene expressions for more drought resistance, for better plant growth and regulation, for nutrient increases, big increases in soil carbon use efficiencies and disease prevention. It's a hell of a package, but it's how nature co-evolved to all work together and not be simplified. And this excellent agronomist, Nicole Masters, and soil biologist, just sums it up. It's how we manage our soil micro herd that's the key to regeneration, whether we're managing it with our macro herd animals or really good cropping regimes. But I would argue that cropping regimes are co-evolved really to need animals in the system too. So that's why I come back to my different definition of regen ag. It's those practices that enable landscapes and systems to self-organize back to open-ended health. In other words, to self-heal and to utilize those ancient properties that's still in the system. And that's because they've co-evolved together for so many millions of years. But carry on like that, what chance of getting quorum sensing and tipping points in our soils to get them back to health? So just quickly to finish with the fourth biodiversity function, dynamic ecosystems or biodiversity, etc. It's putting into your landscape, not all, doesn't have to be 100%, but enough to get functionality, tree breaks and retained bush areas, and etc., that will involve diversity and networks, complexity, etc. And there's plenty of good examples of where this is critical. So, for example, if interesting research just came out of Germany, where croplands have got bugger all insects, and obviously natural areas have got much higher levels of insects. But one of the alarming things they've just found because of industrial agriculture was that about 40 years ago, they took some sample sites in forest country, not in farmland, of the diversity and amount of insects. They went back a couple of years ago to exactly those same plots still in the forest lands, and they found that insects have crashed 70%. And what's critical to our food consumption because of obviously pollination, but clearly chemical industrial farming is having an even wider spread effect outside just where it's practiced with its harmful chemicals. But you can look at using diversity in other ways. I was always blind to the vertical level. I was focused on the horizontal pasture level. But whether it's tree lucerne, saltbush, leucaena, I was privileged to work with Professor Fred Provenza in Utah State Uni in America, and he's studied the tens of thousands of phytochemicals in our shrubs. And for example, there's phytonutrients. Australian wattles, acacias, have a lot of tannin in them, and these animals have co-evolved with grasses and shrubs. If they've got an intestinal worm burden or something, they can detect the tannin, which is a self-administered anthelmintic, a drench, and they'll go up and chew the leaves, and it applies to a whole range of other hugely diverse phytonutrients and minerals, which if we get too much of a monoculture, we simplify and lowers their well-being and resistance. Thinking about verticality in a landscape, there's plenty of good examples internationally and increasingly in Australia where you can have grazing and tree crops and shade and acorns, et cetera, to increase production. And shade's going to become critical as we go into a warmer climate too. So how does all this relate to turning things around and addressing the Anthropocene? Just to refresh your memories on those 9 Earth systems, and that we now know, industrial agriculture is if not the major player in causing damage to 6 of these 9 biogeophysical Earth systems: climate change, ocean acidification, the chemical cycles, use of land use, and that alarming statistic on biodiversity loss. I've had the privilege of getting to know Paul Hawken, and when he and 70 scientists looked at the 100 best methods to pull down carbon and address climate change, and we sat down over coffee and he looked at the 24 best methods, we realised that 12 of them were regen ag practices. And I said, well, if you call those 12 regen ag, we're number 1 in addressing climate change. And if you put more soil carbon in the soil, it's going to impact 5 of the other 9 Earth systems as well. Down the bottom, biodiversity, land use, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, this is an enormously important finding that we farmers have some of the very best solutions. And recently, he published this follow-up book. Both books have gone into 25 different languages, and this one's more on the how-to, with lots of great examples in it. But what now has come out is that the US government's so alarmed about climate change, it commissioned one of America's top universities, Princeton, to do its, how do we get to a net zero state with carbon? And their initial alarmings were pretty frightening, like most cropland topsoils now contain less than 60% of their original carbon, et cetera, et cetera. And we've lost 130 billion tonnes of carbon since agriculture began. But there's a positive side, which you don't hear much about. And I wish the governments might wake up, because in the 5th part of that major study, they found that regenerative agricultural management practices has the capacity to rebuild much of this lost carbon stock. And by much, they mean 60% or more. In other words, regen ag is some of the very best solutions to climate change and its other knock-on effects. So look, I'm happy to leave it there before you all go to sleep, because if you like, if we got time, we can move on to the implications of regen ag for human health. And but I'm just wondering if there's this is now time to break, and happy to answer any questions.
Charlie, you knew of much research about the communication between the plants and the microfungi as far as plants that have been raised on high fertilizer previously. So if you got a plant from an orchard, from a nursery that's been raised on fertilizer, put in the ground, how many generations it takes really for that plant to be able to communicate back in the system with the soil to hit its peak sort of nutrient density or its best stage, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great question, which I can't really answer properly. I mean, I would assume, given the rapidity with which fungi and other soil biology reproduces, that it would certainly drift away from a natural system and be sensitized to being a drug addict waiting for the NPK or whatever. But I'm not aware of any research. I think when you've got, I guess what I was trying to say with the big picture story is that we are talking about just tens of millions of years or even longer of this co-evolution, and to go in and simplify it down to the utmost simplicity, things aren't going to work anymore, and the microbes will adapt to that new environment, even if though it's going to take them away from the desired. So, but I'm not aware of any research, but it's a great question. I hope some researchers are listening.
Yeah, we'd like to do something where we can nutrient density test, say, a peach, and then do, say, 5 generations of, raised from seed the next lot, and see each generation whether it has a better uptake as the generations go on at the same point, to sort of further show that the soil repair is actually, the communications are being strengthened better through generations. So I was even thinking when, doing pastures, that saving that seed from that same block of land and reusing those particular seeds creates a better network and better nutritional density, rather than buying in seed again, potentially from somewhere that's fertilized, and then having the uptake not being as strong.
Yeah, I think you're on track. I mean, once you start drastically fiddling with the environment of microbes and plants, they're going to adjust to it. And if you're lucky to have remnant vegetation or anything at home that you can bring back when you think you're getting your soils to a certain stage again. It's a really fascinating field of research, but I can't give you any good indication of where to go to for it.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. That's great.
And you might just see there, Julie, that Aggie's just popped in the chat that she's just currently reading The Hidden Life of Trees, and he makes reference to studies in that area. That might be one to follow up with too. Yeah. Jess, are you all right to unmute?
Hello.
Hey.
Firstly, thank you very much, Charlie, for today's talk. It's an honour and a privilege to be here in the audience today. My question is: we have a property that has been largely left alone for the last 15 years. There's been no management on the property, no chemical additions. Our riparian zone has a significant cat's claw creeper infestation, and we're tossing up whether or not introducing a biological control, and we're just wondering about the implications of, when we look at the whole function of the property, what that might do. I don't want to bring something in and then have another problem to deal with down the track.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with some of the plants and issues. What part of the state are you in, Jess?
Northern New South Wales, in the Northern Tablelands area.
Okay. Yeah.
So the cat's claw creeper is very invasive and beyond the extent of us being able to manage it by hand. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a difficult one. Yeah, I can't really address it for you. It's sort of like one of those wicked problems, isn't it? Whatever you do, it's going to be difficult. And you can't find anything to put in there that might aggressively counteract it, or it's just such a desperate pioneer plant, you just can't control it naturally. Is that right?
Yes, yes, there is a beetle that the government has made available that attacks the plant, and they're suggesting it's about a 5-year period before you start to notice any decline. But you know, there's that concern of you know, causing more damage in a different in that whole ecosystem function.
You'd think they would have done trials to make sure there's no collateral damage on native species. Have they done those?
No, I can't answer that question.
No.
It's a good
Anyway,
one to follow up.
If it sounds as desperate as it is, it's yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it? But be nearly worth taking a punt if you get comfort from the Department of Ag or whatever to do a release and hope that it doesn't go awry. But we all know about cane toads, don't we?
Yes, so more research is the answer.
Yeah, I can't. I'm sorry, it's beyond my knowledge. But get back to the department, and if you're really comfortable with things, well, then it might be worth a good thought. Yeah, I mean, you know, the opposite to the cane toad, as we know, is the prickly pear, the cactoblastis beetle, which did work. So,
yeah, thank you.
Pip just suggested, Jess, that you could try local land services. They might be able to support you with that.
I mean, it's reflective of all the issues of bringing in ideas from a different environment and continent and simplifying a system, and away it goes, isn't it? It's we're all dealing with that. We've got terrible. We've got a neighbour on our western boundary where the wind comes from is covered in lovegrass and doesn't do a thing. So even with 100% ground cover, it still gets in there a bit. So I think we all have some of those issues. Yeah, not easy.
Someone wants to hear about human health. We've only got 10 minutes. I'm not sure if how much you'd be able to cover in that time, Charlie. I don't know if you want to touch on it.
Well, I might skip through and get to anything quickly relevant. Would that help? I wasn't following.
Others feeling the same. Yeah.
Let's see if I can pick up. I mean, I guess the point I'm going to make is that what we've done to our land is now reflected in our human health. That the great acceleration in what we've done to the planet, that one, what I showed you before, what we've done to all the socioeconomic Earth system trends, delayed by 15 or 20 years, we're seeing all the modern human health diseases we didn't see early 20th century. Doesn't matter if it's all the cancers, senile dementia, ADHDs, autism, all those sort of things. You've got to ask the question, how come they've all taken off once we started to interfere with our food and put foreign chemicals in them? And I won't go into that, but we are co-evolved, both from the gathering that the women do and the hunting with the tens of thousands of phytonutrients in the shrubs and plants. We co-evolve for a healthy diet. That's some of Fred Provenz's work. That's just a few phenolics, a few phytochemicals he's found in the western grazeland lands in the States. Australia's got the same, and our nutrients have crashed because we over-process food, we fiddle around with GM, we kill off the soil biology, which are the key guys to deliver a huge range of nutrients, and it all comes back in a way, other than the chemicals, to our declining soil health. And look, there's heaps of research now to show how nutrients have crashed in all our modern foods. Doesn't matter if it's the cereals or the horticultural. There's just dozens and dozens of papers that are pretty frightening. And even the UK Ministry of Agriculture is showing the crash. And that's just since the Second World War, not even dating back to 1910 or something when it was all natural. So I'm really skipping here, but we are putting man-made poisons into the food as well as denutrifying it. And of course, the big elephant in the room is glyphosate, and the evidence that's now mounting on this is just horrific by top soil scientists and others. I won't go into there's just so much evidence now coming onto what it does. We haven't got time to cover that, but it's it's literally frightening. And guys like this wonderful Professor Don Huber, one of the best soil scientists in the States, and previous Department of Ag guy, Bob Kramer, who got kicked out for talking about glyphosate, they can talk. Huber can do a 2-day seminar just on glyphosate. And he survived a hit by the big end of town, by the way. I was talking to him once and wondered why he'd been absent for a year. So the big end of town plays hard on that as well. It's in all our food, and it only takes micro parts per million to interfere with your gut microbiome and penetrate your key blood barriers, and all this crap about artificial meat and everything. I mean, it's predicated on GM soy mainly, which gets sprayed to the hell with all these bad chemicals. So that it's sort of out of the straight into the fire with what you're doing. And I won't go into all the story, but there's plenty of there. And it's also changing what's called epigenetics, the second mechanism of genetic function in the gut, switching on and off the wrong genes in your gut bacteria. And this guy's quite remarkable. He's coming to Australia early next year. Friend of mine, an extraordinary scientist looking at gut health. And if you want to Google and have a good look at a YouTube, he's got a brain and a half. He's a medical doctor. He's now got 15 or 20 people working on. He started on autism and then just discovered how disastrous things like glyphosate are. So that was very quick, wasn't it? But I'll quickly conclude there.
Oh, amazing. It did give us a good glimpse. Thank you, Charlie. Sorry, continue.
I'm not joking. As a species and a planet, we're on the edge. It's that serious. I mean, I'm friends with a lot of Australia's and the world's leading planetary scientists based at ANU and CSIRO, not far away. They are petrified now. I reckon we've only got a generation to turn things around. And that's why I'm so positive about some of the best solutions being regen ag. So we do have a choice. We can try and help save the planet, or we can continue rolling the loaded dice. And Paul Hawken, one of dozens, scores of leading scientists saying we've really only got a generation to turn it around. I'm arguing we've really got to reconnect with Mother Nature. Get our kids off these bloody devices, back into nature, let toddlers and babies crawl in the dirt, pick up bacteria, which is how you get a robust gut microbiome, not an isolated environment. We've got to reclaim our food systems, get back to health, like old fossils like me grew up in the 50s with largely healthy food grown in healthy soils. And it comes back to my definition of regen ag, that they're practices that enable landscapes and systems to self-organise themselves back to open-ended health. If we do the right thing on the land, we're taking off the handcuffs and allowing it to function as it evolved for tens of millions of years. And it's pretty arrogant to think that we can bowl in and interfere with that long co-evolved system. And that's why I'm coming back to that definition. Yeah, we do manage farms, but we also manage landscapes, which are full of these complex adaptive systems. And so my definition is it's farmers enabling self-organisation in landscapes, these ancient systems to emerge again. And this wonderful environmental historian has 3 principles for good farming, which I think are impressive: making people healthier, promoting a just society, and preserving the earth and its network of life. A pretty good philosophy if you want to feel good about what you're doing for society. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Christian theologian who was executed by Hitler the last few days of the war, he says that the ultimate test of a moral society is the kind of world it leaves to its children. And I've got grandchildren, and I think about this a lot. And go back to that original picture I showed you. This long story of Earth's co-evolution over 4.6 billion years is hugely relevant, because we just simply can't play around with this ancient evolved system without doing it at our peril. So look, I'll that was a gallop. I'll stop there, but as I said, I'm happy for those slides to be made available, and if we got time, any more questions?
Thank you. First, I'll just give you a round of applause because I know there's congratulations coming through, and thank yous in the chat as well. We do have another couple of questions there, Charlie. Thank you. So, Bob, do you know how to unmute there? Yeah.
I am.
Yeah, great. Hello. Hi, Bob.
Okay, Charlie, thank you very much. That's absolutely amazing. There's sort of clarified a lot of things for me. My particular question is, you talked about the last slide or so, you talked about the role of Regen Ag in terms of the greater health, better health of the community. And you talked about how, regenerative agriculture will rebuild, I think it's 60% of our carbon. So if we look at what you might call a regenerative community, so you take a community where I am, Golden Mulwari, and you look at, well, how are we going to rebuild, give the community agency and address all those issues we've talked about. It seems to me that if you look at stakeholders in the community, you would have to say that farmers and regenerative agriculture represents a far greater proportion, of the stakeholders based on the benefit they bring. So if you're going to address that issue of how do we build a regenerative community, then regenerative agriculture would certainly be the starting point.
Yeah, I think it's more of a good sum up statement than a question. I couldn't agree more. I mean, it all starts with health, human health, soil health, animal health, and our current modes of doing it are the opposite in many respects. So that's why I'm sort of still on the road talking about this. I just think whether it's the planet, whether it's human health, animal health, and community health. I mean, one of the things about big industrial agriculture is the simplification of rural society into bigger units often with managers who have a more of a short-term stay and don't get the chance to have a long-term vision. All those problems that go with corporatisation. So I think human society, soil communities, the whole thing goes together. If I'm reading the drift that you were getting at.
Yeah. Thank you.
So John Schultz wanted a question, is that right?
Yeah, John, did you want to jump on?
Yeah, thanks for that, Charlie. Enjoyed it very much. Actually watched something with you and Tim Johnson or something last night on a show.
Oh, right.
Charlie, the idea of regenerative ag, you're probably speaking to everyone who's already on board. How do we bring on governments? How do we bring them around to what needs to be done? We seem to be bashing our head against the wall. Neighbours look over your fence and they say, you're doing something smart there. I want to copy what you're doing. But we've just had, this morning, we've had the local council come out and see what we're doing here, and they're very impressed. But how do we take it that next step to get government involved to make and push the barrow down the road for us?
Yeah, the big question. Look, there's positive signs. I've had requests from at least 3-4 senators who want to come and visit, Sally Stegel and David Pocock and our local member, and there's about 6 or 7 at least who are interested in this whole field, both from the planet and the human health side. And we get a critical mass, like there's a delicate balance in Parliament at the moment. You get a group of those senators, I'm hoping, and I think there's a gathering at Parliament House soon on Regen Ag that they're inviting people to. Look, I'm no great believer in politics too much. I'm a great believer in bottom-up change, and I think I wrote a book about the destruction of the wool industry because of agri-politics, but that's another story. But
Yeah.
I know that game has to be played at that level, and there is representation now that's waking up. So, and it seems to me, without getting into the politics, that we've got a different government now that's not beholden so much to the big end of town and to old ways of doing it, that may be more open to change. And yeah, how do we get the message in there? I think it's chipping away at the moment, but we need them, don't we?
We do. Absolutely. Thank you for your time.
All right, thanks for the good questions.
Yeah, great questions. Are there any more? Who's running what you were talking about happening at Parliament House? Charlie, who's running that one?
Look, David Pocock and Zali Stegel will be across it. If you can get onto them.
Yeah.
They keep asking me, but you know, I've been to a few of those events. You can kick tires and carry on and waste a lot of time. But maybe we should support them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting space to know how to navigate sometimes.
Yeah.
But
the question, John was right. It's a level we have to think about. But I know that some of our so-called representatives are pretty antipathetic to Regen Ag. You know, that sponsors a Bayer and people like that, and I get hammered by them. So I don't think the agri-politics will provide solutions. It's got to be some other methods. I get into trouble for saying that, but anyway.
I think, Charlie, if I can add something to that, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot of ignorance at the politician level, but in the upper areas of the bureaucratic management systems, there's definitely an awareness. And I think through the net zero attempts, by default, they're going to come to the conclusion that one of the key ways to meet their net zero targets is going to be through regenerative agriculture. So I think that could be something in our favour, in that I know New South Wales has a decarb hub that's very active at the moment. Whether they're going to get everything together in time is another question for bigger discussion, but certainly through the commitments around the net zero targets, I think we'll see some traction. But it's not necessarily from politicians, it's more the bureaucrats.
Yeah, well, that's important, isn't it? No, look, and the more we can get the Princeton work out and Paul Hawkins work out, et cetera, and there's more being done, the better. Even the planetary scientists, I don't think, have woken up yet to the importance of Regen Ag, even though some of them are friends of mine. They're still focused on the chemistry and all that. But, you know, we might get to a tipping point and who knows, might get going.
And to me, you know, the work you've done in this space, Charlie, really demonstrates the power of one person, you know.
Oh, no, I'm only one of many, Simone, really, but there's a lot in it. But yeah, it's having an impact. You know, I'm the wrong generation to look at a lot of Facebooks and all that sort of stuff, but I gather that's pretty active right across now on Regen side, isn't it? Social media.
Yeah. I've heard so as well. I might be the wrong generation too. I don't know. Yeah, definitely. But, you know, in terms of a movement, and I understand what you're saying, there are a lot of big players, but you being one of those, absolutely. And what you've inspired and the work you've done, you know, is very clear, very obvious to all of us at least, and we know to many more. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you again. I don't know if there's any other questions or comments, but I'm not sure if you can see the chat either, Charlie, but there's some really beautiful comments in there as well.
Okay.
You want to have a look from everyone. So on that note, I'll say thank you all for coming. Again, Charlie, just thank you for everything. It's very inspirational. And it is wonderful to hear that although we are at this crucial juncture and tipping point, that, you know, there are steps that we can take to make a change, and, you know, we've got to just embrace that as much as we can, and in many ways, you know, keep looking after our own backyards to be that inspiration, because that's what helps to make the change.
Yeah, I think that's what makes this space exciting. We can be part of that underground revolution. probably more than anyone else, other than maybe at the policy level. But yeah, it is an exciting space. It keeps you getting out of bed in the morning anyway.
Most definitely. Thank you. Thanks again. And yeah, we'll be in touch. Thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks to everyone. It's great you're doing this course and look forward to the results in the field.
Thanks, Charlie. Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for
Thanks,
attending today.
Okay.
And thank you,
Thanks.
Simone, for pulling this together.
Pleasure. And thank you for being here too, Lorraine. Thanks for making this all possible.
I can't believe I'm saying keep dry, everyone, if you can. Don't drive through floodwaters and
No.
have a good day.
Okay. All the best.
See you.
Bye.